Bill, the title of the session is Why Silicon Valley is Wrong About the Economy. Those are 8 loaded words, and I suspect you have a very hostile audience. Explain.
Okay, let me start with the economy. It's not good because for 40 years, maybe 45 years, income has been concentrated at the top. I'll give you one statistic. In 1990, of the top 0.1% of households by net worth, 15% of their assets were in the stock market. Now it's about 45%. So the reason it's being concentrated at the top is because of the stock market, and tech is right in the middle of that. I'll come back to that. At the other end, there's about maybe 50 to 60% of the American population is living from paycheck to paycheck. This is not the American dream. The American dream seemed to be fulfilled coming into the 1980s, at least for a lot of people, because large corporations basically didn't hire and fire people, and they didn't try to maximize shareholder value. They basically ran the companies for their products and their people, and shareholders did fine. They collected dividends just for buying and holding and selling shares if they wanted to get a capital gain. That all changed in the 1980s and beyond because of, first of all, an ideology that I saw emerge when I was at Harvard Business School in the mid-1980s called maximizing shareholder value, which said that companies should not be run for their products and people, but for their shareholders.
Okay, so let me stop you right there. Shareholder value is the philosophy. Now, most people, I think, looking, particularly in this community, would look at the idea of shareholder value and welcome it. They would think that financialization has turbocharged not only innovation, but the economy as well. Now, it's also created, it might have created inequalities, but it's created such huge wealth that that people who might be living from paycheck to paycheck are also able to buy televisions for 1/10, maybe 1/100th, not 100th, 1/10 of the prices of the past, that they'll have cars that work better, that don't need to be as maintained, that other basic inputs, food, is much less expensive. So help me out and understand, if shareholder value is the problem, make a case for why it's actually done some good before you beat it up.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is not shareholder value. You're talking about innovation. Innovation is something which occurs when, as many of the people out here probably know, there's someone who has a company. They have what I call strategic control. They understand, they hope they understand what they're trying to produce, the technologies and the products. And then they say, how are we going to implement this? And to do that, you have to have learning. If you didn't have learning, it wouldn't be innovation. And that learning is collective and cumulative. There's lots of different people with different capabilities who learn, and they learn over time. Okay, now you need money to do that. But there's a big myth in the U.S. economy that the stock market funds innovation. It does not. Historically, the stock market has been just a way in which people like you, if you get your company to an IPO, can separate ownership and control, can get your money out. So actually, venture capitalists call an IPO an exit strategy. Okay? Now, so the money is important, but that's where the stock market ends, and the company as a publicly traded company begins, and that's where the problem occurs.
That's what you have said is true, but it misses another element to it. The company also owns its treasury shares. It has an asset with which it can buy other companies. Cisco does not need to be innovative. All they need to do is be smart enough to take their highly priced share price
Sure.
and their stock and buy other companies with it and remunerate your managers, your paid managers, with options. Yes, it might be grotesque feeding at the trough, but it's also allowing people to improve their skills and have a competition for talent.
Well, I didn't cue you on this, but I'm happy you mentioned Cisco. Because with a colleague named Marie Carpenter, we've written a case study, History of Cisco, and how Cisco became an innovative company being founded in 1984 and one of the fastest growing companies in history in the 1990s by making profits on enterprise networking, reinvesting those profits, using their stock to acquire other companies, and building capabilities. And they had a great capability at that point to integrate those companies through a learning system that was really essence of their growth. Okay, but then they became the highest valued company in the world in March of 2020, and the stock market went down. And by September of 2021, the Cisco stock was 15% of what it had been in March of 2020. Now, this wasn't because Cisco was doing terribly. In fact, it wasn't really changed that much. But when the stock market went down, Cisco says, well, how can we get, or John Chambers, the CEO, the stock market up? So they started buying back their stock. Okay, now since October of 2021 to the present, basically, they bought about $160 billion worth of stock back. It's about 100% of their profits. Now, what you have to then say is, what else didn't they do? They didn't try to become a carrier class equipment supplier. Basically, they didn't become Huawei, which they could have become. They're the only American company, maybe they could have combined with others, to become a Huawei, which is a highly innovative company that's not only a leader in the world in infrastructure equipment, but in enterprise networking. It has a large share, and of course, in devices.
So I'm going to accept that share buybacks are very questionable and maybe even toxic for capitalism and for the markets. Let's leave that aside, because I think to make that case will require too much time. Let's go back to the topic of the session. What Silicon Valley gets wrong about the economy? Crystallize that for me. What do they think? Why is it wrong? And what should they think? Or what is the economy?
Okay, well, what is wrong about it is that once these companies became successful by being innovative through a model of strategy and organization, using finance to become innovative companies, they started looting themselves, or they were pressured into looting themselves, and that's where the buybacks come in. Buybacks are different than dividends. If I hold shares in a company, I get dividends, and everybody gets the same dividend for holding shares. Buybacks are companies going into the market. They tell their broker to buy back shares and basically manipulating their stock price so that those people who want to sell shares, the share sellers, can get more. Now, who are they? They're the top executives with their stock-based pay. We go into that for hours. There are hedge fund activists, the Carl Icahns, Nelson Peltz's, Paul Singers of the world, who are constantly going in these companies, have nothing to offer these companies other than to say, get your stock price up, we're going to sell the shares. It might take them a few years to make their money. Sometimes they lose. Okay, that pressure is immense. Let me just give you another example. Apple, you just heard about Apple. Apple is the biggest looter of the corporate treasury in world history by far. Okay, since October 2012, under Tim Cook, Apple has bought back $726 billion worth of shares. They did $95 billion last year. They had almost record profits of $94 billion. Okay, why are they doing this? Because Tim Cook wants to keep his job. If they weren't doing this, the hedge fund activists would have been in there and looted the company for them. One of the people sitting on the board, he's now retired, but he was on the board until last March for 21 years, was Al Gore, Albert Gore Jr., former vice president of the United States. He came there in 2003. Apple was not doing this. It's not paying dividends, not buying back shares. In fact, Apple, between 1985 and 1997, after Steve Jobs was ousted, was buying back stock, paying dividends, and almost went bankrupt, had to be bailed out by Microsoft. Jobs came back, he put an end to that nonsense. We don't know what would have happened if he had lived beyond 2011, but he handed basically the company over to a guy who was the outsourcer of their manufacturing, and he's now basically overseeing the largest looting of any company in corporate history.
You said it's the looting of the federal treasury. Why so?
Why that? Because, okay, who is that money going to? It's going to basically people, okay, I'll tell you who it's going to. I'll give you an example. Warren Buffett. Okay, Warren...
But if Buffett sells his share, as he did, he sells his shares, he earns income, he pays some of that income to the federal treasury.
No, but Warren, let me start with, I'll give you two examples. A guy named Carl Icahn, you might have heard of him, a corporate raider, been around forever. Summer of 2013, he bought $3.6 billion worth of Apple shares on the market. I don't have that money, you don't have that money. He had it. Okay, not 1 cent went to Apple. He was not funding anything in Apple. He was just buying shares on the market. He then tweeted out that he had had dinner with Tim Cook, told him to do a $100 million buyback. Apple, under pressure from other hedge fund activists, had started doing this. They then did record-breaking buybacks in 2014, 2015. 2016, Icahn sold the shares for a $2 billion gain. He figured the game was over. Warren Buffett had a different idea. He started buying shares, 10 times the amount. 36 billion, it ended up being 38 billion. Okay, not 1 cent went to Apple. Warren Buffett said, I love buybacks. He said, basically, I can share of Apple can go 5 to 7% to 7% without having to lay out his dime. Now, Warren Buffett has profited from his Apple shares. It's about $168 billion. Okay, $168 billion. Not 1 cent went to Apple. He put no effort, management effort into it. What did they do while he held the shares? They did an average of about $60 billion of buybacks per year. Okay, now what that means, first of all, that...
But Bill, hold on a second. But Apple then holds more of its shares with which it can buy other companies. It can remunerate...
No, it retires those shares. First of all, it doesn't need those shares. Yeah, it can do that.
It's a deeper, richer capital market that more people can enter and exit.
Okay, yes, sure. You can say that it would do that, but it could also pay all those tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, it's probably tens of thousands still, of people in Apple Store, 20% more. That would up the ante in every country they're in to what you had to pay college graduates who were doing pretty routine jobs. Okay, Apple could have invested in a fab. Okay, the United States, this is a U.S. problem. It's facing South Korea, and Taiwan, who are doing the state-of-the-art fabrication. Intel's fallen behind. Intel was offered the Apple contract.
Yep.
They were doing tens of billions of buybacks at the time. They did $145 billion before the current CEO, Jack Gelsinger, came in over the previous 2 decades. Apple could have invested at a fraction of what it was doing in buying back stock in a state-of-the-art fab in the United States. It could have been a spin-off. Okay, Apple outsourced its batteries. It's outsourced its batteries to a company that's connected with CATL, which is the world's leading EV battery producer. It's a bigger story than just Apple. I'm just using them as an example. But the United States does not have a major company in producing rechargeable batteries for EVs.
So the meta point here is that by the financialization of big tech, we have focused on simply pumping up the share price by taking our profits and buying the shares and not actually making stuff for the future of innovation. So if that's the problem, what's the solution?
Okay, so the solution is ban buybacks. They're unnecessary. They were a result of the Chicago School of Economics capturing the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1981 when Ronald Reagan got elected. They adopted a rule called 10b-18, which basically says that a company can buy back 25% of the average daily trading volume of its shares over the previous 4 weeks. For Apple, that's about 4 to 5 billion a day, day after day after day. For Microsoft, it's maybe 700, 800 million, million a day, day after day. Okay, it was a license to manipulate. It was called a license to loot. It was done without any public comment. It's never been vetted by Congress. Based on my research, there is legislation that was introduced originally in 2018 by Senator Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin to ban buybacks and to put workers on boards. It's called the Reward Work Act. So there is something that can be done about this, and it would be an easy thing to do.
Most people in the world would look at America and see it as the engine of innovation globally. And whatever the problems are, please don't fix it because we don't want to ruin a thing that's working.
Well, I'm sorry, but the United States is falling behind. And in critical technologies, I mean, we could go outside of tech to Boeing. I've written on the Boeing crashes with a colleague named Ert M. Sackins. We wrote right after the second Boeing crash about this, and they had done $43 billion in buybacks since January of 2013, including the week before the second crash, an Ethiopian Airlines crash in March of 2019. They had a record peak in their stock price on March 1st of 2019 and had just increased the dividend by 20%. I can go example after example.
What's the downside? What's the risk if we ban share buybacks? Are we giving up anything that we don't want to?
Well, first of all, in the United States, we're addicted to this. Even the Economist, after I published my article in Harvard Business Review in 2014, they had something about it being addicted to cocaine, which I used there. I didn't get much of an acknowledgement, by the way, but anyway. That was, it's an addiction. And if you try to just ban the buybacks right away, it would crash the stock market. By the way, Joe Biden was a big fan of this article that I wrote in 2014. Got a lot of publicity on buybacks, prosperity, when he was vice president. But once he became president, his advisor said, don't touch that stuff or don't go.
Bill, to hear you speak, you have unorthodox views about economics and innovation. My final question to you is, are you an idealist or a romantic?
Okay, so basically I'm just an academic. Okay, and so I've been doing this for a long time. I want to know how the world works. I come out of economics that's being taught by economists, by economists, a bunch of crap, basically, I'll put it that way. Because they don't understand the first thing about how companies work. They don't understand the first thing about innovation. They don't understand generally the first thing about financialization. So having become someone who has looked at how these things work, I would say, in terms of your terms, I'm a myth buster. That's what I've become, but a myth buster who knows what he's talking about, I think.
I appreciate it. Join me in thanking William Lazonick.